welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, October 4th. We're continuing with a series of conversations we've been having with local candidates who are running for state representative seats in our coverage area. And today it's our pleasure to be joined by the two candidates who are running in the Bennington-Rutland district. That would be the towns that would include the towns of Dorset, Danby, Mount Tabor, Landgrove, and Peru. And we're really pleased to have with us today Sandy Pinsonault, who is running as a Republican for that seat, and Mike Rice, the Democrat and the current office holder. Sandy, Mike, thank you very much for making this time.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, really appreciate it. As I said, Mike is currently serving as the state representative for the district. He won an election in 2022, so just finishing up his first term. Sandy has served as the Town Clerk of Dorset for the past 20 or so years, and done a bunch of other things as well. And why don't we just jump right in? I guess I was just curious to get us started. What are some of the issues you've been hearing about from the people you want to represent in Montpelier? There's a number of issues going on out there between taxes, housing, environmental questions, education. But I just wondered, as you've been going around knocking on doors or doing sign waves or putting lawn signs in people's yards or whatever, what have you been hearing from them? Sandy, we'll let you get us started.
Well, I think the biggest concern I'm hearing right now is taxation and affordability. That go hand in hand. I think affordability is different for all ranges of people in our district, and some can afford and some cannot. And that seems to be the biggest thing. Taxes are a huge concern. And again, school choice is another thing, and affordable housing. So those are the top things that everybody seems to have concern about.
Okay, Mike?
Yep, I think those are definitely concerns I hear about all the time too, have heard about during my time in office and continue to hear on the campaign trail. And I would add, climate. I think I heard a lot about climate change and the need to address it when I was running 2 years ago. And in those 2 years, we've seen the impact here at home pretty devastatingly with floods and with late freezes, with all these weather impacts of climate change, and so that continues to be on people's minds as well.
Well, all right. Well, I think we're going to have a chance to kind of explore all those topics, I think, before we're done today. And I should mention also that, speaking of the education piece, both of you will be at a forum at the Long Trail School on Tuesday, October 8th. Starts at 7 o'clock, I think, and that will be talking about education and school choice as well. So I guess on that subject, a lot of people got a fairly nasty shock when they got their property tax bills this year, even though there's plenty of advance warning about it. But what do you think, in both the short term and the long term, should be done to stabilize those property tax rates? Is there a way, do you think, that we could at least keep them from not going up a whole lot further, or having these annual double-digit kind of increases that most people won't be able to afford after a time? So again, Sandy, I'll let you start on that one.
Okay, I'll start. Well, in 1997, I was on the Dorset School Board when Act 60 reared its ugly head. And at that time, the whole entire North Shire district voted no. We did not want Act 60, and yet we were handed it by the Democratic Party, who had the majority or the leadership at that time. It is in its 25th year. We've had 39 studies at how many millions of dollars those have all cost over the 25 years of its implementation. Who knows? But it's a lot. And so I think our Taconic Green School District has done a fantastic job in maintaining their budget and trying to keep their budgets down. Unfortunately, no matter what we do here, because we're in the pool and have some of our wealthier towns in our district, or in our Bennington County area, we're sending a ton of money north. And no matter what we do, we don't have control over it because it's based on the state spending. So no matter what we do here to keep our costs, it's really out of our control. So I think that's a big concern. And I have to give credit to our districts for trying to maintain it as best that they have. And then the school choice topic is, I'm a product of school choice. This is where I grew up. My children are products of school choice. I can't imagine not having school choice. As a parent, I think that's your right to find a school that best suits your child. Every child has different needs, and not all kids go to Burn or Long Trail in our district. And for that reason, I think that those who don't understand it really just don't get the concept of the availability and what purpose it serves. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll just start by acknowledging that double-digit property tax increases are unsustainable for the vast majority of us, you know, speaking as a taxpayer and as a member of the legislature. Talk about how we got here this year a little bit. You know, in December, we're looking at projections of property tax increases of 20 or more percent. And we all said, well, we can't have that, right? But the wheel was already in motion, right? So school districts were already budgeting. I agree that Taconic Green has done, and this year was no exception, did an excellent job of responsible budgeting, delivering a responsible budget that you know, provides the education our kids deserve in these schools at an increase in a time of inflation and everything else that was reasonable, you know, for in this district's budget. But when all of those, so they presented the budget to the community here approved that budget overwhelmingly. Communities all around the state did the same thing. School boards went through the budgeting process, put their budget forth to the local voters approved the budgets, and they come to the legislature, and it's the legislature's responsibility to fund the budgets that have been approved. I agree that the process is broken in that the decisions that are being made on the local level are not carried forth in what the property tax rates are in that same location, right? So the legislature worked diligently this year to pull every responsible lever that was available to us to make sure we weren't at those 20% or more increase levels. And we brought it down by over a third statewide average. Our towns are all below that statewide average in terms of an increase. But again, like I said, still too high. So I think moving forward, what we need to do, and I don't dismiss the Commission on the Future of Education that was created at the same time that we approved these increases in property tax rates. I think from what I can see, everybody sees this as a crisis. Everybody's ready to come to the table and come up with a solution that makes sure this isn't the same year over year moving forward. I think that's going to look like structural change to the way we deliver and fund education in Vermont. And those are going to include you know, some difficult conversations in communities. It will likely include conversations about how many school districts are the appropriate number in our you know, small population but rural state, how many school buildings are the right number. And it should also include you know, conversations about whether the way we're funding education, you know, largely on the backs of property tax payers is the right way. If there's a more diversified way to pay for the needs of our schools and our students, and if there's a different way for the state and the relationship to work between the state and the districts. So for instance, you know, there's been the idea thrown out of doing what a lot of states do, which is more the block grant style, setting an amount per pupil that goes to each district from, and then local districts get to decide how to spend that money. And if they choose to spend more than that per pupil, then that is going to come from the local taxpayers. And so that would really be connecting those local decisions to the local communities much more than they are now.
One of the problems that Act 60 was intended to correct, if I'm recalling this correctly, back in '97, was the idea that more affluent communities could afford to spend more money on their local schools and school districts. Other towns that didn't have, those same kind of resources were kind of, stuck with having to go to their own local taxpayers, and Act 60 was an attempt to kind of equalize that a little bit. Have we reached a point, do you think, that it's just time to kind of say, well, Act 60 might have worked for a while, but is now, it doesn't really serve us as well as it should, and particularly around that point of local districts voting their budgets. They seem reasonable at the local level, but when you can pile them all together on the statewide level, we wind up with, the legislature having to come up with a whole bunch of money that maybe was more than anybody anticipated. Is that kind of the core of the problem?
I think it's definitely the core of the problem, and it was also its intent to equalize the education opportunities that each school district would have, because some school districts had more opportunities to have better courses or classes or full-time physical education librarian, full-time nurse, where other school districts couldn't afford it. So it was supposed to equalize those opportunities amongst the school districts. The monies that are being sent were never used for that purpose. The test scoring didn't get any higher. The education didn't get better in those school districts that were receiving monies. They didn't use it for better the education. They used it for structural needs or whatever. So therefore, it hasn't worked. And we're at 39 studies. It's obviously not working. It's time to let's redo the whole thing and figure out what's going to work that's going to make everybody happy. And a block grant is the block per pupil is probably the best way. And if you want to spend more, then you have local control. Right now, we have no local control, because no matter what we want to spend on our kids, we're going to get punished for spending too much.
Yeah, I think also just 25 years is a long time when it comes to, a lot has changed in the state, a lot has changed in education, in what our schools are being asked to deliver for families, for students. So I think it's certainly, probably past time to be saying, okay, this is what's been in place for the last 2.5 decades or more. Let's look at what the best formula and what the best system is moving forward to make sure that we're delivering what these kids need. We talk about increased mental and behavioral health needs in the schools. And that's a big part of what's sort of causing part of this increase in spending. Those needs are real. So what we need to do is figure out how to pay for them without asking of our property taxpayers double-digit tax increases every year. The needs won't go away. So we've got to figure out how to meet the needs of our students and our families in a way that we can afford.
Well, complicated question, one we could probably easily spend half an hour talking about.
Absolutely.
But it'll be interesting to see how this whole conversation goes forward. Wanted to move on to a couple of other points that you both mentioned at the start. And I was wondering what you both thought about the proposal for the clean heat standard. That's a bill that, this is a complicated story. I'll try to make it as concise as I can. Basically, the legislature next year will be having to weigh in on a proposal that the Public Utility Commission is theoretically developing, and to see how the state could meet its greenhouse emission standards. But there's been a lot of concern about the clean heat standard, concerns that it would bump up the prices of heating oil or propane or gas, even as we try to develop a credit market for, let's say, an oil dealer to become a heat pump installer. At least they would be able to get credits that way. And I know that I'm barely scratching the surface of the complexity of that, but I'll let you guys fill in the rest. But do you think that approach is a good one, or one that is really the best we can do at this point, or is there another way we could go to try and reduce those greenhouse emissions? Mike, I'll turn to you first in this one.
Yeah, well, first I'll just say that the purpose is to reduce emissions and also to help low and moderate income Vermonters make the transition that those who can afford it on their own are already making themselves, right? So we know that the price of oil and propane is very volatile. It fluctuates with all kinds of national and international events that are completely beyond the control of the Vermont legislature or anybody in Vermont. So what we're trying to do is help folks who are currently at the whim of their, price volatile fossil fuel bill to heat their home, transition to something that will be, in the end, more affordable and more reliable and more predictable for them. So that includes weatherizing homes. Folks who can afford to weatherize their homes on their own, they do it because it makes financial sense. Folks who can't afford to do it are left paying more and more for their heating bills without being able to make that change. Same with installing heat pumps. So that's the purpose behind the bill. And there's been a lot of sort of misinformation and disinformation out there about this bill for years now, about what it's trying to do, and who it's targeting. I also think that the way we've gone about this from a process standpoint is the right way to legislate, which is that we said we think this program can accomplish these goals. We think that we have a way to allow low and moderate income Vermonters to make this transition and get off the train of the price volatility of fossil fuels, while also allowing these fuel dealers to diversify their offerings, right? I mean, I think regardless of where you stand on this policy, it's a pretty good bet that being an importer into the state and distributor of heating oil and propane is not a great sustainable business proposition for the next 100 years. And so to give the lifeline of saying, this is a way for you to start offering, and a lot of these companies are already doing this, right? Start offering heat pump installation or weatherization and help our communities make this transition together. That's a part of it too. But we're not sure, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to ask in legislation in 2023 for the Public Utility Commission to do all the information gathering, to do all the studies, to design the program, and before it's implemented, hand that information back to the legislature, a new legislature in 2025, and we're going to essentially start the process from the beginning. We're going to say, okay, is this really going to do what we think it's going to do, what we hope it's going to do? Is it going to do it at a cost that's affordable for Vermonters? Are there changes we need to make now that we have this information? And then we'll, with a new bill, move forward and hopefully implement a program that does do the things we hope it will do and work and works. I think that's a pretty good legislative game plan to say, we think we've got a program, let's make sure we've got all the details right, let's make sure we've got all the information we need, and then let's start again in a new year and try to implement the program.
And Sandy, would you agree with that?
Well, sort of, and yes and no. I think Vermont has done an amazing job already in reducing its emissions. I mean, we're down like 6% in the last 5 years, 6 years. So I think we are the leading state in the nation right now in emissions control. I think that we could have done a better job in trying to work with our surrounding states and formed a coalition of some sort to go at it at a much bigger picture than what Vermont is doing. I think in the global picture of things, what we do is not going to affect the overall global emissions of what's coming on out of other countries until other countries get on the wave of cutting their emissions. What we do here is not going to have a huge effect on global warming. I think we just need to take our brakes, slow our brakes down a little bit and just observe. And I have a real hard time with government telling us that now you have to drive an electric car and now you can't heat with oil or you can't heat with propane. A lot of the infrastructure in Vermont is old. So I think the money would be better spent helping people insulate their homes and weatherization versus telling them that they have to heat with a heat pump. A heat pump, if your house is airy and got air gaps in it, no matter how much you put in it for heat, the cost is going to, your heat pump's going to be pumping all the time if your house has got a lot of problems. So those are my concerns. I think that it's the architect of the bill, Senator Bray from Chittenden or Addison County, has already said he's looking at $1.70. And he's that's a low. He doesn't know, and nobody knows. And I think that we're going to be shocked, and I don't think anybody would vote in favor of it when they go back to legislature next year to sustain any kind of tax on gasoline and fuel oil, propane.
You seem to be shaking your head.
Well,
there,
just
Mike.
a few points of response. The first is nothing in this bill and the program it contemplates is forcing Vermonters to do anything. It's about a system of incentives. It's about helping those who want to make these changes do it in a way that they can afford. This is part of the disinformation that's been out there about this bill. It does not tell people they have to install a heat pump. It certainly doesn't address electric vehicles at all. There's nothing saying you've got to drive this or that. There's nothing saying you can't heat your house with oil or propane. It simply is setting up a system of incentives so that folks who can't currently afford to make these changes that actually make sense, that will actually lead to a better affordability in heating their homes in the future, can choose to make that change if they want to. Also, I'll say weatherization is covered by this bill. It's one of the things that the fuel dealers can earn credits for is weatherizing homes. So that is a big part of this, because we do acknowledge that there are different solutions for everybody's house. I mean, I live in an old house with an old oil boiler, I'll say. You know, I haven't been able to afford to make that change yet. Weatherization would make a huge difference in that house, and it is covered by the bill. And Senator Bray was saying that $1.70 sounds unreasonable. There have been low estimates that point toward a number that's more like 1 to 5 cents in the early years after implementation per gallon of heating fuel to help pay for this transition. And I agree with your last point, which is that if we come to the end and we've got a program that definitively is going to add dollars on the per gallon price of fuel or propane, it's not going to pass the legislature, and I wouldn't vote for it.
Okay, well, let's move on to another, I think, big question. Well, it's been a big question for a long time, actually, and that's the housing issue. We all know we have a housing shortage. A lot of folks can't afford to live here, move here, rent an apartment here, if they could even find out an apartment to rent. And there's no quick, simple, easy answer to this. This is a nationwide problem, basically. But in terms of Vermont, and in terms of your district, what do you think is the role of the government in helping to make the housing crisis, if I can use the term, a little less onerous? Are there zoning regulations or other kind of regulations that the state government maybe could enact that would be sort of incentivize potential housing developers to go, now I can put up a 4 or 5 unit housing project over here. We can, sell it for a price that a lot of working folks can afford, and I can make a profit out of it at the end. Or is it just so complicated in between the cost of construction and the cost of labor and the labor shortages in the first place, price of land, a whole bunch of other factors involved, that it's just, hey, we're just going to have to wait for the market to sort it all out?
Well, I'll say I think there is a role for government here. I think our constituents send us to Montpelier to take action, to do things, to help, right? And so just to sit back and say, well, we'll wait and see how it all shakes out wouldn't be a responsible answer on the part of a legislature, and I don't think anybody thinks that. We've been doing a lot over the last few years, both on the regulatory side and on the investment side. We've done some sort of common sense to me regulatory changes, things like making sure that any place in Vermont where you can build a single family home, you've got to be able to build a duplex. There can't be a regulation that says you can't build a duplex where you can build a single family home. And that just makes sense, right? It's double the housing on the same footprint. Things like allowing to go a story higher, building up instead of spreading out. Just common sense ways of increasing our housing stock, I think. I was, proud to support this year the most dramatic reform to Act 250, our land use law, our 50-year-old land use law in decades, which is going to do a lot to make sure that we can build more housing in the places that can handle the growth most immediately. So places that already have denser housing, the places that have capacity, the places that already have water and sewer, or soils that test to install the proper facilities. That's going to make a huge difference. And also, it's going to take investment. You know, we invested $100 billion this year across the spectrum of housing needs, from developing permanently affordable housing to addressing, you know, the needs of the missing middle, which is something we hear about all the time in this part of the state, to repairs for manufactured homes, to you know, developing services, wraparound services, and shelter for those facing homelessness. So $100 million sounds like a lot. It's going to take several more investments of that kind of funding to really solve what is, you use the right word, a crisis in the state. And it's not Vermont alone, right? We see this across the country, across the world. We see it everywhere. But I think it is the responsibility of the state government to do what we can to solve the crisis.
And Shandy, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the new proposed, or the new changes to the Act 250 are going to make it more difficult for people in our area, because it is more designed for the central urban areas, the Burlingtons, the center of towns. I visualize, you know, all these buildings going up and up and up, and then there goes our beautiful landscape of Vermont, because now we have tall buildings housing people. Not what I visualize Vermont looking like. But there definitely is a crisis. I think since COVID, it really hit home with the shortage, and a lot of people coming out of the cities and coming here, and the short-term rental, long-term rentals problem. Yeah, I think the government has to have some control over it, but I really don't like the idea that they're taking so much of the Act 250 is getting that much stricter. I've watched people in the past try to develop their land and know how many thousands of dollars it costs to get that implemented, and I fear that it's only going to cost more. And for those people that can afford it, fine, but if you've a farmer that's giving up his farmland and wants to develop his 5 to 10 acres or whatever, and now can't because it's interrupting with our natural resources of some sort or whatever, yeah, I have a real problem with it being stricter and more control.
I don't think it made it stricter. It actually, for the first time in the existence of Act 250, withdrew jurisdiction in some places. You know, currently Act 250 covers the entire state, no matter what. And the reason for that is that 50 plus years ago, when it was implemented, we were nowhere near the local zoning and planning processes that a lot of municipalities have now. And so what Act 250 says is there are going to be places, that what the reform says, the modernization that we did this year says, is that we acknowledge that there are places that can handle this on their own. They have robust planning and zoning processes. We're going to take that statewide Act 250 jurisdiction, we're going to take it out of those places. We trust those municipalities to handle it on their own. The top tier certainly is geared toward those most dense places, Burlington, et cetera. But there's also the sort of just under that, a secondary tier that covers, I think, a lot of places that are relevant in our region and sort of in the more rural places in Vermont. And basically it says that if you have either water and sewer, or soils that perk for the development, and some kind of permanent planning process in your town, then within a certain distance of your town or village center, you're going to be able to build up to 50 units on 10 acres or less. 50 units is a significant housing development in almost any town around here. So I think that the modernization got the balance right between acknowledging that we have a housing crisis, acknowledging that there is a regulatory fix that can help to ease the way and make it easier and faster to build housing, but still standing as a protective force for those forests and farmlands and waters that we value so much in Vermont, that we care so much about, and that make our state what it is. I understand what you're saying about building up, and there go your mountain views, but I think if we build outward, well, the views aren't there either, right? Because suddenly we've lost our forests, we've lost our farmlands to sprawl development. We're not talking about skyscrapers in Manchester, right? We're talking about maybe allowing for a 4-story building instead of a 2 or 3-story building. So it should be still appropriate for each, for the location, but we've got to get creative and innovative if we're gonna both regulate and invest and build our way out of this problem.
And I'll just counter with that is that it's one more thing that's taken away from local control and put into a regional planning commission's hands. And that towns have designed zoning based on what they feel is best for their communities. And now some towns still don't have zoning. So I think that it's just one more thing that more control based by government and not by local decisions.
I mean, I value local control, and I think that a lot of towns do a lot of things right. I also think that each town is not going to solve the housing crisis on its own. I was really excited to see this sort of in the early stages of creation and planning, this project that's underway up in Londonderry, Jamaica, Weston, which is towns coming together as a region and saying, how can we figure this out regionally? To where's the location, what's the housing need, how can we do it together instead of each town sort of hoping to solve the problem on their own.
I was wondering, Sandy, maybe for this you, the Act 250 bill that was passed in the last session, how would it affect the larger towns in your district like Dorset and Danby? I mean, that allowed towns to create more dense housing in their downtowns. Basically, that was one of the pieces in it. Do you think that there's not enough space in either those two towns to kind of build in there, or would it somehow another kind of not work for those two communities?
I'm not sure about other towns. I know Dorset has a project that might come to fruition for more housing in Dorset on Rapture Lane, where our new town office is going to be built. We have the possibility of building more than 50 houses, but again, we've already talked about the complications of the Act 250, and it's going to be permitted. And there's the town that owns the land, has an opportunity to grow and have some housing, and not sure it'll even be feasible. So those are huge concerns.
Mm.
And just one more point on the
Sure.
Act 250 modernization is that it's a work in progress. So we passed a bill this year that establishes some frameworks, but it also says we require a robust public process over the next couple of years to design the final sort of what this will look like moving forward. So we extended some exemptions that were present in the last couple of years in terms of trying to just really allow for building now to help solve the housing crisis. We extended those exemptions over the next couple of years so that we can go around, and planning commissions and others all over the state, here in Bennington and Rutland County, up in the Northeast Kingdom, in Chinton County, they're all going to have their own, locally driven conversations and provide that feedback that's needed to fill in the rest of, what this is going to look like moving forward for the next several decades.
So shifting gears again, I wanted to ask a question about taxes, actually. I guess we'll go back to that. But as I sort of try to follow things the state government is doing, it seems like there's a lot of ideas for proposals or projects or things to do, and they all cost money, right? And now sort of post-pandemic, the federal dollars aren't flowing into the state in quite the same way they were in 2020, 2021. So in order to kind of fix some of these issues, the state will have to come up with, it seems like, more money from somewhere. Do you think one fair and reasonable way to obtain more money and to kind of keep a budget in balance would be to tax the wealthiest Vermonters more than what they may be currently taxed? Or is our tax rate already as progressive as it probably is intelligent to be? The downside risk being that some of those folks will figure, wait a minute, I can move someplace else and pay a lot less in taxes and come back to Vermont for 5 months out of the year and live here anyway. Or is it the case that, we got to find the money somewhere. Ordinary folks are feeling about as maxed out as they can be already. But is that a fair possible solution to all of that?
Well, I mean, I think that our tax system does a really good job in Vermont of making sure that the folks at the low end of the income spectrum aren't paying more than their fair share. What it doesn't do a great job of is making sure that the folks in the middle aren't paying more than their fair share. So, and it hasn't always been that way. There used to be a fourth sort of upper tier of income tax, and it was done away with. I would argue, there was a proposal this year, as you know, in the legislature to create a new tier for those earning over $500,000. Pay a couple more percent if you're earning over $500,000. Now, it'll be a new legislative session. The bills will all be new. So I wouldn't say I would support that proposal next year or whatever. But what I think you got at the right crux of the question, which is we have these needs. We have a lot of really serious needs and challenges in the state. And if we're going to address them, they do cost money. We need the resources to do it. So, I would at least be willing to entertain, okay, well, what does that look like? What does it look like to have a new tier for income earners over $500,000 to make sure that the middle class aren't, being overburdened because there's not that next level tier for the extremely high income earners. I think a perfect example of sort of meeting needs with taxes is what we did with childcare. There was an acknowledgement that our childcare system was really at the brink, that it was broken. And there was also an acknowledgement, and I really appreciate that there was an acknowledgement from a lot in the business community that said, we've got to do something about this, and it takes public investment to solve this kind of problem. And so what we were able to do is solve the problem. I mean, we brought the system back from the brink. And we did it with a very small payroll tax, a payroll tax of less than 1/2%. A tax that if you're earning, $60,000 a year, you're paying less than $5 a month in a payroll tax to solve an enormous societal problem, to open up 1,000 new childcare spaces just in this year alone, to have 39 more in-home care centers open, which is hugely valuable for our rural communities. To have thousands more Vermont families eligible for tuition assistance so that they can afford to send their kids to childcare, early childhood education, and that those parents can afford to go back to the workforce, because we saw before we passed this bill, families paying upwards of 30% of their household income just for childcare, untenable. So, this is just an example of how we can solve problems together if we all agree that public investment is good for everybody and can help our communities thrive.
Sandy, what are your thoughts on the idea of taxing wealthier Vermonters?
I personally think that our scales have shifted growing up here. I didn't come from a very wealthy family, but I never considered ourselves poor. My mom was a stay-at-home, and my dad worked, and we had 6 kids in our family, and we had a great life. But I think that talking about middle class, I don't think the middle class. I mean, where's the middle class? I mean, the poverty level, the cost of what it costs to live and work and stuff is so different than what it was in the 60s here, 50s and 60s. So where is the middle class? $500,000 to me is not middle class. I mean, that's wealthy. 100,000, that used to be rich. That used to be your upper class.
We're doing well.
So where is our middle class? I think middle class needs to be redefined. Again, it's not those people that are they're working day to day, the 2 household incomes that are trying to survive. They're the ones that are suffering the most. Yes, our lower income are suffering, but we have lots of programs for them. It's the middle income that needs to have more focus on. And our upper class, where that figure is, I'm not sure. But if you're making 3 digits, you don't need childcare support. And I think that scale of apportionment has to be reevaluated. If you're making three-digit income by yourself or combined, you don't need free lunch program either. So I think we have to really start looking at what that moderation or the evaluation of what those middle ranges are, because there's certainly the jobs aren't here that pay double digits or triple digit incomes. Either you're working from home for some outside company, and therefore, but taxation is a huge problem. And again, back to the payroll tax, to me, it's a scary proposition. I think they're in our back pockets now. And I keep saying that because every time something's going to come up and they're going to need a little bit more money for whatever program that might come out or whatever surcharge or whatever we want to call it, they're going to be in the payroll, and they're going to say, well, we're just going to tweak it a little bit more. And before you know it, it's going to be up to $2 or $3 and, in time. And then that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, and it's a regressive tax. So the low income people living below poverty are paying the same rate as somebody who's making a three-digit income, and that's not the way it should be. It has to be totally different. Tax the ones that can afford it, and the ones who can't and are using those programs should not be taxed at the same rate.
What about taxing businesses more? Would that make sense? I mean, again, the downside risk there is that some of these businesses that are already operating on thin margins, particularly a lot of the smaller family, independently owned businesses, even a small amount of increase might make them go, whoa, we're done. Or is that a source where there is, as we look around at these potential buckets of where money might come from, is that a fair place to look at?
Well, so what we did with the child care contribution, for instance, is we gave businesses the opportunity to pick it up for their employees if they so chose. So it can be split either as a 0.33% contribution by the employer and a 0.11% contribution by the employee, or the employer can say we're going to offer this as a benefit to our employees. We're going to pick up the whole 0.44% contribution. So I think that's a reasonable approach. Giving businesses that acknowledge that it's a benefit they'd like to offer to their employees, and acknowledge that it does that. These kinds of, we see a 3-to-1 return on investments in the case of the child care contribution, that the ripple effects in the economy are good for our communities, good for our economy, good for our Vermont-based businesses. I think those businesses can choose to do that.
One other point about the child care, I'm a little confused as how we've opened up 39 new child care centers in 1,000 new positions. We just started collecting the tax in July. People are just making their quarterly payroll tax payment. So who's paying for that at this point?
There was a one-time allocation of funds in 2023 to get the program started. And the idea was that would stabilize bring the industry back from the brink, stabilize it, get the program in motion, and then this year we would start collecting the payroll tax so as to continue the operation of the program.
Okay, well, it's already been reported that they're not collecting enough. So we'll see what it adjusts to next year, because they're not collecting enough to get money returned on the investment. So it's.
Oh, well,
we'll
to be seen and to be continued, I guess. Just before we have to run, I wanted to ask you both if you thought there's a need or and a desire maybe on the part of all the folks involved into sort of making the communication between the legislative branch and the executive branch better than what it seems to have been from the outside anyway. It seems like we had a situation where Governor Scott towards the end of the session wound up having to veto a lot of bills he didn't like. I kind of wondered, one would have thought that in January or February, both the executive and legislative branches would be talking to each other about what they could live with in terms of an idea to fix a problem. But it seems like we get to late April or May, and the governor says, "Whoa, I'm not going to sign that piece of legislation," and a tremendous number of bills get vetoed, and then they either have to be overridden or whatever. What do you think needs to happen to make that communication get better? I mean, I realize you guys are just going to be one representative among 150, and there's a lot of voices to be heard in that conversation. But I just wondered, do you think that it is a problem? I mean, maybe it's not in your opinions, or is there some other way that we could avoid having a situation where the governor vetoes a dozen bills in May?
I think there's a huge communication lacking there. I think there has to be some give and take, and I think a supermajority on either party is not good. I think you have to be able to cross the line and see what's best for your constituents. And there's just, it just amazes me that the majority, now the majority of the supermajority voted to veto, not thinking about their own constituents and not just with the party. I think a lot of the voting is done just by party and not by what's best for their areas. So I have a huge concern with that. I think the governor did put out a lot of opportunities and options and wasn't listened to. And so, yeah, there's a huge concern of lack of communication within both sides.
Yeah, I'll say, I mean, I think governing by veto and veto override is not an ideal way of governing. It's not what anybody wants to go up to Montpelier and do. I think that there is more nuance to the supermajority question. I think it's easy to sort of bat around as a political talking about a supermajority. But the reality is it's 104 people, or was at the last session, from all over the state. Some of us from down here in Bennington and Rutland counties, some from Burlington, some from the Northeast Kingdom, from over in Brattleboro, and all in between, right? Those people do have very different perspectives, different needs for their communities, and those perspectives and needs are brought into the building. And we try to reach consensus, both within the Democratic caucus and with independents and with Republicans and with progressives, and often we do. I think one part of the story that doesn't get told all that often is that hundreds of bills pass every year with broad, bipartisan, tripartisan, cross-partisan support. There are a handful of pieces where sometimes we can't come together, and can't come together with the governor. I think that there's balance with a legislature controlled by one party and an administration controlled by another. I think we have a lot of good conversations. I think there is room for improvement always on both sides. I think there are times when the legislative majorities, can listen better, and I think there are times when the governor and his agencies can participate in a sort of more full and holistic way for the many months that we're all there and asking for testimony in committee and occasionally don't receive the testimony we need and things like that. So I think that there's always room for improvement. I think these are the things that constituents don't really want us to be talking about or don't want to hear about. I think they expect us all to be adults and go up there and communicate with each other and try to do the best work on their behalf. And I think that's certainly what I'm always trying to do. And I think it's what the vast majority of my colleagues across the political spectrum are trying to do. And I hope we'll all try to do better as well.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to give you both an opportunity to just sort of, give a closing statement if you want, for lack of a better term. But, whatever it is we didn't have a chance to talk about today, there's probably another 5 issues out there that we could easily have spent the next hour kind of batting around. But I think we're just about out of time here. So, but I just did want to give each of you a chance to say, whatever it is you feel like we didn't talk about today that is an important part of your platform, and any reason why they should vote for you, or something that they should know about that maybe we didn't have a chance to talk about. So, Sandy, you're the challenger, so we'll let you go first.
Like I've been saying, I grew up here. My heart is here. I have deep roots here, and I'm concerned about my constituents in my district and around the state. And I just feel it's time that we have some more cognitive and equal bipartisan representation up there. And I'm willing to work with Governor Scott. I think he's done a fantastic job. He's liked by 70%. He's the #1 governor, most liked governor in the nation. And I think he needs more collaboration and people willing to work with him, and I'm willing to do that. And I want to be able to represent the people that I went to school with and grew up here that are leaving. And I'm meeting people every day that, like, we're out of here. As soon as the kids are out of high school, we're gone. And we moved here to put our kids through school, and we're leaving as soon as they're out of school. So I have huge concerns about what the demographics is going to look like in a few years. So that's really why I'm in this. So.
Okay, and Mike?
Yeah, I would just say, I didn't grow up here. I moved to Vermont years ago to work on a farm, and I fell in love with this place. And I knew it was where I wanted to stay and become committed to a community. And I learned how hard that was to do, for a young couple who needed to find jobs that could pay us enough to live here, needed to find housing. My partner Sean and I, we sought a rental housing. We found one. We were able to buy our first home in early 2020. We both, Sean found a job in the community. I decided to take on this public service. We found our community here, and we love it here, and we care deeply about this place. I am really proud of the positive vision that I have for this place, for this community, for this state. I think that we can work together to achieve that vision and to make this a state where everybody can thrive and where all Vermonters are taken care of. I've been really proud over the last couple of years to do work with a bipartisan national group called Future Caucus, which is a group of young millennial and Gen Z state legislators from all across the country and all across the political spectrum who are committed to breaking down the partisan divide, working together to solve the problems that we've grown up with, that we've seen our whole lives entrenched. And really proud of the last year to have been selected as a policy fellow in strengthening democracy with that same organization, working across the partisan divide to really make sure that we are committed to strengthening our democracy, to increasing public civic engagement, and working across the aisle to do so. I'm also really proud, I think, along those same lines, we face a series of threats on the national level that our state and our state legislature specifically are going to be sort of the last line of defense, or could be. And one of those is on reproductive rights. I'm proud to be endorsed by Planned Parenthood Vermont Action Fund as a pro-choice candidate. I was proud to take votes defending reproductive liberty in the legislature last year, and proud to have their endorsement. So, whether it's working in a bipartisan way with young legislators from across the spectrum, or working to defend rights we hold dear, I really have a positive vision for the future here, and I hope to have support to keep working.
Well, all right. Well, we'll have to leave it there for now, but again, I wanted to thank Sandy Pinsonault and Mike Rice for coming in here today and sharing their thoughts and ideas about what they would do if elected to the state representative seat for the Bennington-Rutland district. That would be Danby, Dorset, Mount Tabor, Landgrove, and Peru. I always struggle to remember all 5 of them. That's a lot of traveling around and somebody's going to have to be doing, I'm thinking. Anyway, thanks again. I really appreciate it. Really interesting to hear from both of you on this. We have certainly an interesting election coming up. So yeah, thank you all for being with us. Hope you found the program interesting and informative, and we'll see you again the next time. Take care.